morning, we're gathered on Treaty 6 territory, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection to this land. I'm joined today by Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley and Ian Young, an AISH recipient. In 2019, one of the first things the UCP government chose to do was cut vital benefits for seniors, vulnerable, and disabled Albertans. The seniors' benefit, income support, and AISH payments were no longer increased to keep in line with the cost of living. This was a cruel decision and pushed already financially vulnerable Albertans further into poverty. The UCP justified these cuts by saying they couldn't afford the increased cost while running deficits, yet at the same time they paid for their ridiculous war room and gave away handouts to wealthy corporations. To add insult to injury, the UCP even said that these cuts, and I quote, weren't onerous. We know that was incorrect. It's clear that the UCP is completely out of touch with the lives of Albertans who rely on these benefits. I would now like to turn it over to Ian.
Thank you, Marie. I became a person with a disability in 2004. When at the age of 40, my life forever changed. I had several strokes that left me unable to walk, talk, or swallow. After nearly a year in hospitals, long-term care, then the Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital, I gained back some of my independence. I now live alone, I make my own decisions, and reside in a housing cooperative. I began receiving AISH in 2005, at which time I became an Albertan with a disability living under the poverty level, the national poverty line. Indexing of benefits was introduced by former Premier Notley and her NDP government after consultations with AISH recipients, disability services, agencies, and support workers province-wide. Jason Kenney promised more than once that the UCP would not de-index. They never kept that promise. It never consulted with the disabled community. Since 2019, I've received $1,105 a month from AISH, which included $141 for a special diet recommended by my specialist. Income also includes $595 a month from CPP, which is a Canadian disability pension, which gives a moderate cost of living annual increase, but AISH takes that money away dollar for dollar. So for the last 3.5 years, after paying all my bills, I was left with $36 a week to live on. That's what was left to pay for my groceries, transportation costs, recommended vitamins that AISH does not cover, over-the-counter medications not covered, repairs for my equipment, which is also not covered. All Albertans were impacted by the pandemic, but it was especially challenging for us because we were not given support for protective equipment or costs related to the pandemic. We were ignored again. The cost of everything has gone up. We all are aware of that. For example, I cannot live in my building if I don't have insurance. My tenant insurance has almost doubled. Many things have. Utilities are skyrocketing, food prices are rising, everyone is out of reach. Now, finally, after 3 years of extreme hardship and intense public advocacy, the government is finally going to re-index benefit payments to inflation, but it is on a go-forward basis. This move will not help us catch up from 3 years of extremely difficult years of poverty, unanswered questions, in my words, being ignored. Our community was not consulted on standard of living. Now I will receive $1,196 from AISH, and my CPP will bring my total income to $1,785 a month, which means after paying all my bills, I'm again in a similar situation of poverty. We are doomed to stay below the poverty line under the UCP government. Not fair. Our community is not looking for a handout, but a hand up. Every member of the UCP government should try living on what they think is good enough for us. I don't think any of them would be very happy with the conditions and the circumstances they have to live with. At the very least, they should allow us to participate in decisions that are made to affect our lives. Being a person with a disability should not make you feel like you're in jail for a crime you did not commit. Thank you. Talk to us and acknowledge us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you for sharing with us about your struggle. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Rachel.
Well, thank you very much, Marie, and of course, thank you, Ian, for all of your advocacy and for all of your work on behalf of vulnerable and disabled Albertans. I also want to acknowledge our colleague, Laurie Sigerson, who has been a tireless advocate on behalf of Alberta seniors, who have also been impacted by this series of decisions over the last few years. Our Alberta NDP caucus is proud of our time in government and the collaborative work that went in to getting vital benefits indexed to inflation. In fact, it was a policy that received unanimous support in the legislature, including the UCP MLAs at the time, and it was roughly in the fall of 2018 when that decision was made. But as soon as the UCP managed to gain government, they immediately imposed these cruel cuts onto Ian and all of our fellow Albertans who depend on these supports. Laurie and Marie and advocates like Ian have fought passionately for 3.5 years for these cuts arising from the failure to index to be reversed. Simply restarting indexing does not undo the harm caused over the 3.5 years as thousands of Albertans were pushed deeper into poverty. In fact, it amounts to baking in the 3 years' worth of cuts during the worst inflation we have seen in 2 generations. So I'm here today to say to Ian and all seniors and vulnerable and disabled Albertans that we will not leave you behind. An Alberta NDP government will immediately increase the value of all of these benefits to where they should be if they had kept pace with prices over the past 3.5 years, and then commit to indexing for inflation from here on. For an Albertan receiving AISH, that means an immediate monthly increase of $135. Restoring these benefits to where they were when the legislature unanimously approved them will cost the provincial government $218 million per year. This is a responsible investment in helping families, seniors, vulnerable and disabled Albertans live in dignity. During our time in government, we cut child poverty in half in this province. I often think about how escaping from poverty changes the trajectory of those lives, of those children. A child who wakes up in the morning in a safe and secure housing and has a good breakfast, before going to school, has so much more opportunity to succeed in their lives. So all Albertans should be able to live in security and in dignity. An Alberta NDP government will always be focused on keeping more money in your pocket. So in 2018, at almost exactly the same time in the election cycle that we are in right now, the UCP voted for permanent inflation protection for vulnerable Albertans. Then, one of the first things they did once they got elected was break that promise and strip that protection away from the most vulnerable citizens in this province. Now, at the same point in time, they're claiming that they're going to protect those folks, just like they did last time. And I say to Albertans, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Not a single Albertan can trust the UCP and take their word that they won't undo inflation protection for vulnerable Albertans exactly as they did after their election in 2019, should they still be in government after this spring's election. But Albertans have my word that an Alberta NDP government will return AISH and income support levels to where they should have been had inflation protection been maintained throughout the last 3.5 years, and we will ensure that it continues into the future. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions folks may have.
Thanks, and we'll start with questions in the room.
Yeah, I'm wondering what impact raising these levels, is it going to be considered exempt income, or is it not, to this $135 that's coming in?
I think that's kind of that's a complicated issue that impacts a whole bunch of different other programs. So of course we'd have to look into it as it relates to each of the various programs. For instance, as Ian pointed out, ensuring that Albertans on AISH get the same benefit of cost of living increases that come from CPP, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, the idea is that we will ensure that cost of living and the entitlement to cost of living increases is consistent across the income benefits and income support benefits that people receive, regardless of the different combinations that contribute to them.
And I do have an off-topic question. Sorry, I'm writing about both, but the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees has said that the strain on workers in the children's services sector is getting worse. They raised the alarm last year. It's getting worse, and they're worried that it's going to impact children. What do you think needs to happen around recruitment, retention of children's services workers?
Well, I think that's a really important question. You know, we talk a lot about recruitment, retention of those really important frontline service providers in health, but we know that people who devote their lives to keeping children safe, that's also an area with high burnout, and they have been subjected to a tremendous amount of pressure. And of course, we know something that's really not talked a lot about right now is that the number of fatalities of children in care has exploded over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, and it is heartbreaking. So we would definitely look into, immediately look into the whole ministry and look at getting recommendations across the board for what we need to do to expand support and protection for children in care or receiving, even temporary care, and then at the same time ensuring that we're able to recruit folks into that work, while also working very collaboratively with First Nations groups and ensuring that we do a better job of recruiting from within those communities as well.
Morning, Rachel. Dean from CP. So the feds are going to proceed this spring with the just transition legislation. What do you think about that, and what does it mean for Alberta?
Well, I think that what we need to be focused on, first of all, is collectively looking at how we engage in sustainable job protection and growth. And I think we need to perhaps move away a little bit from the debate that seems to be developing over the use of language and instead focus on the object. And as far as I'm concerned, the object must be to support the growth of jobs within our oil and gas sector that are focused on the work that I think everybody within the oil and gas sector agrees that we need to do, which is reduce emissions and ensure that we are well placed to be the market of choice internationally. And so we can do this, and we can create within oil and gas more industrial jobs across this province by investing in the tech necessary to reduce emissions. So that's the model that I'm focused on. And I'm afraid that with all this rhetorical debate, because we're in the political red zone and the connection to sort of rational facts is becoming increasingly tenuous, that what we are doing, in effect, is delaying the necessary work that has to happen to bring all the parties to the table to make sure we get shovels in the ground on the kinds of projects that are going to support oil and gas and support job creation.
Can I get you to elaborate then when you said the red zone, the rhetoric is sort of muddying everything?
Well, certainly, I mean, we've got two problems certainly in Alberta, which is of course where I'm most focused, because that's the area that I'm seeking to play a bigger role, is first of all, we've got a government that has introduced a Sovereignty Act, which, as you know, our view is that that has created tremendous uncertainty in the investment community. And we know that to increase emissions reduction investments in oil and gas, like for instance with CCUS, we're looking at billions and billions of dollars of investment that are necessary. And it is hard to attract that investment when we've got the Sovereignty Act hanging above us like the sword of Damocles. So that's the first problem. And now that's been even exaggerated and amplified by what is effectively a pre-election period where it appears as though our current government is much more focused on rhetoric than outcome. And what that means, or what I'm concerned that will mean, is that we will talk endlessly about a word rather than doing the hard work of rolling up our sleeves and getting to the table and coming to the kinds of agreements that will get projects started.
Go to questions on the phone. Just a reminder to press *9 if you're joining us on the phone. Use the raise hand function if you're joining us via Zoom. If you could say your name and your outlet at the top. Go to our first caller.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Sure can now.
Thanks so much. Okay, this is a message for Rachel Notley. Sorry to be off topic. It's about the election. I wanted to ask you for your thoughts. Political watchers say that the Premier is often saying Trudeau's name and is taking on Ottawa when she speaks about her political opponent in the upcoming election, very rarely mentioning Notley or the NDP. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't really want to talk about names and personalities, but what I will say is this. Albertans have been excruciatingly clear about what it is that they want to see their government focus on. They want real solutions to the crisis in healthcare. They want long-standing solutions to the affordability crisis. They want a government that can walk and chew gum and focus on doing the work that's necessary to increase and attract more investment in long-term sustainable jobs within our economy. So the problem that we have right now is that we have a premier who is more focused on trying to create fights, pretend or real, with the federal government to cover off the fact that they are failing desperately on those issues that matter so much to Albertans. So the problem, as far as I can see it, is that we've got a premier who would rather talk about Trudeau than talk about Albertans.
Any follow-up, Stephanie?
Yes, my follow-up is that there's a detected softer tone or approach that we're seeing from Premier Smith, more infrequent blunders or controversial statements. Are you seeing that shift as well, from the campaign trail to her time in office?
Well, I guess it really all comes down to how low the bar is from which you start measuring those achievements. But let me just say this. The UCP has a clear track record of saying one thing before the election and doing quite another afterwards. And Danielle Smith, as a politician, has a personal track record of flip-flopping more frequently than probably any politician in Alberta's recent history. And today we are talking about the indexation of income support programs for vulnerable Albertans, which is a clear example of where the UCP tried to moderate themselves and tried to present themselves as kind and caring legislators about 4 or 5 months before the last election, who then immediately targeted the most vulnerable Albertans within weeks of getting re-elected. And so I would suggest that Albertans should be encouraged to look at the whole record, not the 30 or 60 days before the vote is cast.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hi there, Janet French from the CBC. I just want to follow up on one of your previous answers. You said that the focus in the energy transition needs to be on the technology necessary to reduce emissions rather than reducing emissions itself. This sounds like a bit of a pivot to me from your time in government. Do you no longer have policy goals to reduce emissions productions? And if not, why not?
No, that's not true. We're very focused. We want to see emissions reduced for a broad range of reasons without any question. So I think we need to be holding ourselves to account for that. But first of all, I do believe the targets need to be practical and achievable. So that's the first thing. And as you know, I previously said that the current draft targets that the federal government are coming out with respect to emissions caps in the oil and gas sector are not, in our view, achievable or practical. And that position, one that I took almost as soon as they first floated them, has since been supported by the parliamentary budget officer saying that we're not quite there. There's not, you know, it's where I think there's lots of possibility to get to an agreed to emission cap that will require everybody to come together and roll up their sleeves and work hard to make sure that we reach those goals, and that we, of course, make very quick progress towards the 2050 goals. But everything has to be within the context of what is actually doable. And I will say, Janet, that one of the problems with respect to achieving those limits, those emissions reductions within a certain period of time, is that it gets harder and harder the longer we spend engaging in rhetorical campaigns, as opposed to doing the hard work of investing in, and to go back to your question, the technology that will play a key part in reducing those emissions. So there's a very live debate right now going on about the formula for CCUS investment and construction and growth. And that live debate is being deferred right now until after the election, it seems, because the province of Alberta is not engaging in a meaningful way. And so that hurts Alberta workers, and that delays the growth of the kind of good jobs, good industrial jobs that will be part of that process. But make no mistake, we understand that emissions reduction must happen, but it needs to be practical, and it needs to be achievable, and can still be ambitious within that context, but it is something that folks need to get together and reach an agreement on. And then there needs to be a partnership in terms of how it is financed. And that work is what's being delayed right now.
Any follow-up, Janet?
I do. New topic. Can you please confirm that the lawsuit naming your deputy leader, your former communications director, and the government over comments about power companies making secret backroom deals, that legal issue has been settled? And do you have any regrets about the way your government communicated about that issue?
I wasn't directly involved in that. My understanding is it has been settled, and I don't really want to relitigate both sides of it. At the time, we were very focused on standing up for Albertans who were ratepayers and ensuring that they got a fair deal, and ensuring that the people of Alberta were party to a fair deal. And I'm glad that we were able to raise that concern and do that work at the time.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hi, this is Lisa Johnson from the Edmonton Journal. I just wanted to follow up on some of the previous questions. In reaction to Danielle Smith's rhetoric about this green jobs plan from the federal government that we're expecting, I'm wondering if you can clarify. I mean, Danielle Smith has said that we should call it a targeted attack, and said that it amounts to, or will amount to, the death of oil and gas industry jobs. I mean, do you share that concern if it's not designed correctly by the federal government?
I think obviously we need to see. Sorry, there's a weird echo. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. We need to see the details of what comes forward with respect to the Sustainable Jobs Plan that the federal government is putting forward. At first glance, in the economic update that we saw come out last fall, the amount of money that they have earmarked for this program doesn't suggest that it's going to be a particularly significant program one way or the other, because we're not looking at a lot of money. I believe it's something like $200 million over 5 years. So hate to break it to anybody who thinks that is going to have a substantial impact on labor force development growth or trends in Alberta or anywhere else, but it won't. So unless they change the amount of money they are talking about with respect to it significantly and then throw a whole bunch of conditions to it, I don't see it as being particularly impactful. However, I agree that we need to use language that talks about what I think certainly Albertans want, and I think some folks in the federal government want, maybe not all, I don't know, which is that we're looking at sustainable job support. And I believe quite genuinely that the opportunity to reduce emissions in the oil and gas sector itself, along with the growth of other energy sectors, actually represent an investment opportunity, an economic growth opportunity, and a job creation opportunity. And it is one that the government of Alberta should be fully engaged with for the purposes of supporting our oil and gas industry as the energy provider of choice worldwide. And that work is what I'm afraid has been deferred and put off because this government has been far too interested in playing rhetorical politics.
Any follow-up, Lisa?
Hi, thanks for that. Sorry about the feedback. I'm jumping back and forth between devices here. You mentioned, talking endlessly about a word rather than doing the hard work of rolling up our sleeves and getting to the table and coming to solutions and getting projects started is a concern. I mean, are you saying that what Danielle Smith is arguing and what she's fighting back against is just a red herring? And if so, what do you want to see in this federal green jobs plan beyond the money that has been outlined, as you said, in the emissions reduction plan? I think it was $9 billion across the entire country. What do you want to see invested in Alberta to make that plan work?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think that there is tremendous opportunity for all parties, federal government, provincial government, private sector, of course, to come together and work on opportunities that exist within the oil and gas sector. So, for instance, we had an example not too long ago of an investment in a $1 billion hydrogen project in the industrial heartland. It was 3 or 4 months ago, where the federal government, I think, threw in about $250, $300 million. Provincial government threw in about half of that, and the private sector ponied up the rest. And that was around developing hydrogen. Obviously, a lower emissions fuel source that comes from within our oil and gas sector. Another opportunity is the growth of LNG. We have seen the government already look at ways to fast track, or I wouldn't say make exemptions to, but fast track valuable mineral projects with respect to the development standards or development rules under Bill C-69. We'd like to see the same thing applied to LNG because we know that LNG is another way to reduce emissions worldwide, but it is another a mechanism within the oil and gas sector as a whole. So those are examples above and beyond what I've already been speaking about with CCUS. So what we'd like to see is those and that's the dollar amounts there are considerably different than what so far we've seen talked about with respect to the federal government's sustainable jobs plan that they, I think, will be rolling out this spring. But that's the work that we need to do to continue to grow and make viable and exciting and to create lots of jobs in our oil and gas sector while reducing emissions and pivoting on the type of energy product we're able to create within that sector.
And we'll go to our next caller.
Hi there, Michelle Belfontaine from CBC. I actually have a question about AISH, the AISH announcement that you just made. So I'm doing a little bit of math here. So the current payment because of the increase to the cost of living is $17.87 a month for a single person on AISH. You add $135 as you're proposing, and that comes to $1,922 a month. Based on a 40-hour week, that comes out to $12 an hour, which is well below minimum wage and certainly well below the living wage, particularly in Edmonton and Calgary. So I ask you, why not more money? These people cannot work through no fault of their own, at least work full time through no fault of their own. It sounds like $12 an hour is still poverty line to me. So I'm wondering if you can address that.
Well, that's, I think that's a really good question, Michelle, and I think that our work on how we support Albertans with disabilities who are otherwise limited in terms of how they work is not complete. So in no way, shape, or form would I say that those aren't important things for us to consider going forward and would engage, as Ian asked us to do, with those within the community about those kinds of issues. But in the meantime, what we want to be able to do is ensure that the commitment that was made to vulnerable Albertans by every member of the legislature in 2018 to ensure that the increased level of benefits that we provided at that time, because as you know, we also increased the base level in 2018 when we also made the promise to have them indexed permanently, that promise be restored. So that's what we're talking about here today. But you absolutely raise a good point, and I think that we have to look at that as well as look at housing costs and healthcare costs and some of those issues. And in fact, we will be engaging in another paper at albertasfuture.ca, which will be rolling out relatively soon, around anti-poverty, and the kinds of questions that you highlight there, Michelle, will feature in that discussion and those consultations.
Any follow-up, Michelle?
Yeah, I do. I mean, yeah, okay, but some of these things like housing costs, that takes a while. That's going to take a while to resolve because that really is about supply and demand. And then this is something you could do right away, right? Like you could raise the amount that people get each month and at least save them from having to go to the food bank, save them from, like we have all heard the stories that people are really suffering out there. So, I mean, why not do better?
Well, as I say, at this point, we are proposing to raise by $132 a month right now. And that would, of course, be in addition to the so-called inflationary payments that we know are not expected to extend past May. And so that is the starting point. And with some of the income support programs that are implicated by what we're talking about today, there is or was a rent supplement program that was in place. So it wasn't so much about market, it was just providing an additional rent supplement, which of course, as you know, we've been trying to raise the alarm about the fact that the UCP has quietly cut that over the last 18 months by changing the criteria for eligibility around that rent supplement. And so we've already said that we would restore that. So there's a lot of different pieces to it. So this is the starting point, and as I say, we will be also rolling out an anti-poverty discussion paper in the next few weeks, and looking at about what the reasonable next steps are there.
And we got time for one last one in the room.
Arthur Green, Western Standard. First of all, Happy New Year, Ms. Notley. Just want to politely ask you, why did you stay silent on Trudeau's attack on the oil and gas sector in Alberta until today? And do you agree that oil and gas workers need to be transitioned into greener jobs?
So as I've outlined, what I think we need to do is support the industry itself. And create more jobs within the oil and gas industry that are focused on reducing emissions. And there is a role for the federal government and the provincial government to play. And there are negotiations underway right now, but they are appearing to be blocked because of the rhetoric that is going on right now. So, you know, for instance, on CCUS, which is an important game changer, which, you know, once that formula is locked down, we will see a lot of other major projects start to go forward. And right there on CCUS right now, we see the federal government actually already commit 50% of the cost, and yet the government of Alberta has been silent on what role they would play or whether they would offer anything on that project. And of course, the has grown with the Biden administration's inflation reduction measures, which have now put greater subsidies into play, and so we're now in a competitive race with respect to attracting these investment dollars. So that conversation has to happen. But I don't believe that getting, you know, whether we're going to get the federal government to raise their contribution beyond 50%, or whether it's all going to be paid for by Alberta taxpayers, that is or how much the private sector is going to put into it, because obviously they benefit from this, so they should be putting some money on the table too. That is a conversation that has to happen at a table, and it is hard to do if all we're doing is throwing darts at each other, because the real life impact of that is that the conversations aren't happening, the decisions aren't made, the agreements aren't reached, the projects aren't greenlit, the shovels do not get into the ground, the jobs are not created. So we need to understand that our conversations have practical implications in the lives of Alberta workers, and engage with the necessary level of responsibility that would suggest.
I do have a follow-up question about AISH. With the indexation of AISH, well, I know Ian said that you know, the pandemic really hurt his pocketbook. Will these payments be paid retroactively?
No, they would. What would happen at this point is we would retroactively calculate the base level of AISH as though folks had been getting those increases all along. So it would commence once we put it in place. So we'd see that $131 increase, and then the indexation would be off of that base level.
And that's all for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.